game, if you like, to put it in a somewhat pejorative way. What that means, the practical implications is that in systems with strong legal and vigorous democratic institutions, for example, industrialized democracies, bribery is very risky and thus it's avoided. So we don't have really a problem of bribery in Canada. That's not to say it doesn't take place. It's to say it's not a serious problem and something that we have to worry about because we have institutions in place to ferret it out, to deal with it. It's interesting, you had a presentation on the sponsorship scandal, but people are still being held to account on the sponsorship scandal in Quebec. It's still happening in that particular context. The wheels of justice grind very slowly, but as some people have said, they grind exceedingly fine. And they're grinding very finely at this particular point in time in Quebec. But the other side of the coin is that where this isn't the case, that's to say they're not strong legal or democratic institutions, then bribery is an obvious option, and bribery is almost certainly going to thrive, particularly when you're dealing with large corporations with very deep pockets. It becomes an investment, and the reason that it's an appropriate investment is because obeying the law and the laws in place, bribery is illegal in every country in the world in which there is a modern legal system. It's also incompatible with the ethical systems of virtually every society in the world, the bribery of public officials. So in countries that have weak systems, then you get to profit maximization more quickly if you bribe, because you can in fact get past the regulatory system that's in place. And until probably the 1990s, economists in fact talked about bribery as a lubricant of economic systems. It wasn't until the 1990s that a shift began to take place and people began to look at bribery as a serious economic problem. Until that period of time, virtually all of the economic analysis described it as a lubricant and something which had to take place in countries with weak regulatory systems. I've done something. So that's the practical information. It also means that for all systems, economic systems, substantial resources are likely to be devoted to minimizing regulatory constraints. That's one of the points that we heard, and that's going to be a corporate impulse. And regulatory weaknesses are likely to be exploited and social costs externalized, which means that they're going to be pushed off onto other people in pursuit of profit. And just let me mention a couple of examples that I think are important. I can't take too long with this, but one of the areas, perhaps the only economic area where Canada is a world leader, is in mining. Maybe you didn't know that, but it's the case. And our stock markets, the Toronto stock market, is the primary stock market for mining stocks in the world. So Canada is an international leader with respect to mining. Probably what you didn't know was that there isn't a single developing country in the world with natural resources which have been exploited by mining companies that has benefited from the development of that industry in their country. Not a single country in the developing world has benefited from mining taking place in their country. And that's not me talking. That's the ICNN, which is the spokes group for the largest mining companies in the world. They have finally recognized that this is one of the outcomes of mining as it's developed internationally in the developing world. It's also true of Canada, by the way, in those underdeveloped or developing parts of Canada with respect to our Aboriginal people. That's also a fact, but it's an astonishing fact. The financial crisis, in my view, is just simply another illustration of this phenomenon that we see operating here. The profit maximization was what was driving the financial crisis. You discovered regulatory weaknesses, and the drive to profit maximization, which is legitimized. It's the justificatory approach approach that's taken by the economic system, by corporations, to the behavior of, or to the work of the people who work for it. It's the justification. That's what justified what people were doing. So they never saw it as wrong. They saw it as doing what they were expected to do. Well, given that virtually on every account in defense of market economies, the ultimate objective and justification of markets and corporations is not shareholder wealth maximization. That's not why we, for example, have allowed the creation of corporations in Canada or anywhere else, or personal enrichment. That's not the justification. But wealth maximization for the whole of society. I mean, given that everybody, including CEOs who are making huge sums of money, if asked to justify, talk about wealth creation for the whole of society, then how is it the case that profit maximization got so deeply embedded in management theory and practice? And how did it happen? And when did it happen? Historically. It's not, by the way, that's not built into the concept of a corporation. It's not built into the concept of a corporation. And if we looked at business history, I could provide evidence. If you go back, for example, to the 17th and 18th century, now this is a big company, you would see a completely different approach to a corporation, a different set of ideas. Well, here's the short answer. These are very short answers, and I paint with a very broad brush. I'm suggesting that, in fact, this particular mantra, and it's become a mantra in many respects for the corporate community, was embedded in the management system in the 1970s, early 1970s, as a result of a partnership between the Chicago School of Economics and the Harvard Business School. If you go back in business history and look, it wasn't until the 1970s that Harvard managed to persuade the business community that the best business leaders would be people who had an MBA. That's when it happened. If you go back to the 1960s, virtually nobody who managed corporations came out of business schools. Virtually nobody did. They came from law and engineering, mostly, not from business. And it was in the 1970s that began to change, and it was Harvard that changed it. Harvard created the business education model for virtually the whole of North America, probably the whole world. That's where the model came from. And it was on the basis of the development of management theories in Harvard that the idea that you begin to evaluate management on the basis of relatively short-term results, profit maximization results, that's where you see it beginning to develop in the 1970s. It's rather interesting to me that if you actually look at the trajectory where you start to run into serious problems that are driven by profit maximization hypothesis or model is in the 1990s. And if you think in terms of the educational cycle, it's in the 1990s that people who got management education began to become the CEOs of our major corporations.